Eliot Ness was born on April 19, 1903, in Chicago, Illinois, to his parents Peter and Emma King Ness. Ness attended the University of Chicago, which he graduated from in 1925. 2 years later, he obtained a job as an agent in the Chicago branch of the U.S. Treasury Department. He soon became involved in the Bureau of Prohibition and was assigned the task of bringing down Al Capone, a notorious bootlegger in Chicago. The passage of the 18th Amendment, which prohibited the production, transportation, and sale of alcohol in the U.S. in 1920, had given rise to both the Prohibition era and the Bureau of Prohibition. During this era, bootlegging, which is the illegal production, distribution, and sale of alcohol, became a big problem. Indeed, bootlegging and other crimes increased and became rampant to such a degree that eventually, the 21st Amendment, which repealed the 18th Amendment and ended Prohibition, was passed. During a short stint at the Bureau of Prohibition, Ness spent the majority of his time fighting bootlegging. One man who profited during this era of Prohibition was Al Capone, who led a group of gangsters in a multi-million-dollar bootlegging enterprise. Capone was much more than a bootlegger, however, for he was also responsible for the murders of many rival gangsters. In 1929, Ness set about the task of bringing down Al Capone, something nobody else had been able to do up to this point. In order to do so, Ness led a group of 10 federal law enforcement agents known as the Untouchables, so called because they refused to succumb to bribes from Capone. Ness's efforts were successful, and in 1931, Capone was sentenced to 11 years in prison for failure to pay income taxes. Ness and the Untouchables greatly contributed to Capone's downfall by seizing and halting operations of breweries run by Capone. Moreover, they slowed the production of his bootlegging empire, which contributed to the eventual demise of his enterprises. When the Untouchables disassembled and the Prohibition era ended, Ness left Chicago. He moved around and had a few different jobs, finally settling in Cleveland in 1935. At this time, Cleveland was one of the largest cities in the United States, with a population of roughly 900,000 citizens. With such a large population, there were bound to be problems within the city. For example, Cleveland's police department was full of corruption and in need of new recruits for the job. Additionally, the crime rate in Cleveland was significantly high before Ness's arrival. The city's biggest issue, however, was the safety of drivers and pedestrians. Upon his arrival in 1935, Ness was quickly appointed to the position of Public Safety Director of Cleveland. In this role, Ness's main goal was to keep the citizens safe. Ness, leading a group of 34 agents, began to explore the public safety issues he considered the biggest threats to the safety of Cleveland's citizens. When Ness arrived, Cleveland had 250 traffic-related deaths per year, enough to make it considered the second worst city in America in this category of deaths. Ness made an attempt to fix this problem by implementing a court that severely punished people who committed unsafe acts while driving. This forced citizens in Cleveland to drive more carefully. The positive results of his initial efforts were seen in the reduction in traffic-related deaths in Cleveland. By 1938, the number of deaths had dropped to 130 per year, and by 1939, there were only 115. Consequently, Cleveland was awarded the Safest City Award in a national traffic safety contest that year. This award was a great achievement for the city, which was previously rated very dangerous in terms of traffic accidents. Another major factor in increasing traffic safety in the city was Ness's creation of the Accident Prevention Squad. This group conducted safety inspections on vehicles in the city and were more strictly enforced Cleveland's traffic laws. As can be seen, Ness's hard work paid off greatly, and he was one of the main reasons for the dramatic turnaround in the city's traffic safety. Another success for Ness in the area of traffic safety was his introduction to the ambulance, rather than police car, as had been the previous protocol. The ambulances were used to respond to calls that consisted of injuries needing significant medical attention. This greatly decreased the time it took for injured people to get to the hospital. They could also receive medical attention during the transport to the hospital. Furthermore, the switch in vehicles also allowed police cars to respond to calls involving crime, while ambulances handled injury. Ness's work with the Cleveland Police Department is often regarded as his biggest contribution to the city. When Ness first arrived in Cleveland, the department was full of corrupt officers.
He reorganized the police department in 1938. He got rid of the precincts. There was something like 20 different precincts which officers would report to on a daily basis. He cut it down to 6 district stations, 2 on the west side, 1 downtown, and 3 on the east side. And the inspectors in charge of them reported directly to the chief, so it cut the chain of command down quite a bit. It made the officers more accountable to their direct supervisors, made the higher echelon officers more accountable to the chief. He fired some officers. Some officers actually went to jail. A lot of officers were transferred to different duties.
These corrupt officers made Cleveland riddled with crime and incredibly unsafe. Soon after his arrival, Ness set out to fix this issue, especially through attempts to weed out the corrupt officers.
On some of the people that Ness acted against, the head of the vice squad and a captain named Michael Harwood, who had been in command of the Collinwood area of the city. And if I remember, if I'm right on this, both of those people went to jail. Head of the vice squad and Harwood.
Ness succeeded in getting rid of a number of corrupt and dishonest officers, including many high-ranking ones. Other corrupt officers decided to seek early retirement upon realizing Ness's determination to rid the department of corruption. In order to fill the holes left by the corrupt officers, Ness began to hire younger officers. To help prepare these young officers for their new positions, Ness created the Cleveland Police Academy in hopes of ushering in a new era of officers that would provide much less corruption to the department and to the city. The remaining reliable officers were very excited and welcomed these changes in the department. Ness's strong efforts to rid the department of corruption not only influenced the Cleveland Police Department for future generations, but also set a precedent for the other police departments across the country. One problem that Ness had throughout the process of getting rid of the bad officers was the lack of proof of corruption.
Sometimes with the civil service protection, you have to be able to prove that an individual is corrupt or is doing something wrong. It might be strong suspicions that the officer was doing something wrong, so the transfer would be in place of formal actions which you couldn't win.
Okay.
So the individual got the message by being transferred.
Beyond traffic safety and corruption within the police department, Ness had many other issues to deal with. Of these, one of the most difficult that Ness dealt with as safety director was the mystery of the Cleveland Torso murderer, perpetrator of the Kingsbury Run murders. The Torso murderer was a serial killer in Cleveland responsible for the deaths of 12 citizens. He gained the name Torso murderer from the fact that he decapitated all of his victims. Ness worked diligently to solve this case, yet was never able to prove that the man he suspected, Dr. Francis Sweeney, was the actual murderer. Sweeney was not able to be arrested due to the lack of proof connecting him to the murders. This case was one of Ness's biggest challenges, and it took up a lot of his time. As a result, he was upset that he was unable to solve the case, yet he was dedicated to his job enough that he was able to continue to concentrate on his other duties. In his work as Cleveland's public safety director, Ness noticed that gang violence that he had seen during his early career in Chicago was also highly prevalent on the streets of Cleveland. Ness found a way to control gang activity among Cleveland's youth by promising teens that the city would create safe havens. Author Paul W. Heimel writes, he promised the youth that the city would provide recreational opportunities, including basketball courts, baseball fields, gymnasiums, and playgrounds, if they would police their own ranks in curbing illegal activities. In addition, Ness established Boy Scout troops, with the support of civic leaders in order to help inner-city kids be responsible citizens and get involved in the community. Eliot Ness had one of the greatest impacts on Cleveland as its public safety director throughout the 1930s. This was largely a result of his determination to create a safer and cleaner city. Indeed, Ness was a huge factor in taking Cleveland from one of the most dangerous to one of the safest traffic cities in the U.S., reducing the annual death rate from traffic accidents along the way.
Accidents, the city of Cleveland back in the mid-1930s was one of the worst cities for accidents, vehicle accidents. And he revised how they investigated them and how they controlled them, and was able to turn it around within just a few years. And made it one of the best cities in the country, safest cities in the country, as far as vehicle accidents.
In addition, Ness weeded out over 200 corrupt police officers from the Cleveland Police Department, and even created the Cleveland Police Academy to train a new, young generation of officers to fill out the department. From the moment Ness arrived in Cleveland, he had his mind made up that he would improve the city. He isn't always recognized for his great accomplishments as safety director, but still remains as one of the greatest contributors to Cleveland to this day. All of Ness's efforts in the realm of traffic and public safety helped make the city safer from crime and corruption. All his efforts changed Cleveland for the better.